As we were driving through this gated community my parents lived in, we get pulled over. I get escorted from my vehicle to the back of one of theirs, and I'm sitting in the back, and within a minute from me getting pulled out of this car, there's a whole row of like undercover detectives and agents, and there's a dog in my car, and he's not my dog. And I don't know how this all happened, but it was just like a snap of a finger. I'm looking back there, watching all of this go down, and then here comes my mom driving, because she was wondering where I was, and I had called in 20 minutes prior, and I see her put their window down and talk with one of the detectives, and then I saw her drive by, and the only thing I can describe it as, I've unfortunately have witnessed, is a mother standing over her son's casket. The sadness and the pain, disgust that was in her face. It looked like she was mourning her son, and there was something inside of me that broke right there that day that I didn't know that I still had, and it cried out, not involuntarily. It said, "God, help me. I don't know how I'm going to continue to live like this. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." The weirdest thing happened, and for some reason, those people in AA came to my mind. At this time, I'm 23 years old, and I get put in a federal detention facility. I'm facing 929 months.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you are all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Hello, boys and girls. Well, you are in for a treat today. That was Matt C's voice that you heard at the beginning of this episode. This is the story of a young man who found recovery, as he says, on the inside. In other words, he was in prison. And while he was in prison, there was a couple of sponsors there with him who helped him to find recovery. At one point, Matt's world was reduced to an 8x12 cell, but today he walks a free man, and he is free in more ways than one. So one of my favorite parts of the episode is when he, in more kind of a lighthearted piece, he discovered moonshine and how economical that moonshine can be. On a more serious note, he had a horrific auto accident, and he talks about how they put Humpty Dumpty back together again after that accident, but it came at a cost because in rehab he came across pain pills, and that took him on a journey that he did not want to go on. So before we get started here today, I have a couple of letters, couple of listener feedback emails, I should say. And Sue writes in. Sue says, Tim S. was and is the best speaker / meeting I have ever heard, maybe ever. He made so much sense to me, just absolute sense. Powerful words. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, John. And for those who want to find that episode, it's the episode actually right before this. It's episode number 40S. Excuse me, 40S. It's episode number 46. It's called Tim S. of Sober Nation. Make it to midnight. Jackie writes in, and Jackie says, she's talking to me, she says, I heard your interview, John M., on the Bubble Hour and immediately downloaded your podcast. I listened to a few other sobriety podcasts, but yours stands out in a way that is so close to a real meeting. I am only able to make 1 or 2 meetings a week because of my work schedule, but absolutely love that you offer this, quote, meeting between meetings. I especially appreciate the women on your podcast. Just finished listening to the Mary B episode. So much wisdom, she says in capital letters. I've been in the rooms of AA since July 2016, but feel like I am just getting with the program, and I am loving discovering a new connection to my higher power. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. In all cap letters, I appreciate the work that you and your wife are doing for the rest of us. Much love, Jackie E. from Northern California. Well, Jackie E., much love back at you. I sure do appreciate you listening to our podcast, and I hope that we can play some small part in your sobriety, and God bless you. You hang in there. Now, we're on to Mr. Matt C. Enjoy. Okay, so we are sitting here with Mr. Matt C. from Nashville, Tennessee. So, Matt, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, give your sobriety date, let folks know some general information about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, John. Hey, everybody. My name's Matt, and I am an alcoholic. And my sobriety date's May 1st of 2008. Home group is the Wake Up Group in Nashville, Tennessee. And I have a sponsor who has a sponsor, and I also have the privilege of sponsoring other men in this program.
Why do they call it the Wake Up Group? Do you have any idea?
We meet at 7 a.m. Tuesday and Thursday. And we'd love to have you. If you're ever in the West Nashville area, please come by. We have some coffee, hot and ready for you.
Okay. So it's the Wake Up Group because you meet early in the morning. That sounds good. All right. So just kind of by way, I just want to let folks know how Matt and I came across each other here. Last summer, Matt was when I say last summer, for those of you listening to this, that would be the summer of 2018, at the end of July, beginning of August. Matt was a speaker at the Crested Butte conference, and that's Crested Butte, Colorado. We have a whole episode we did on that. You can go back and listen to it with me and Steve G at some point. But I was at that conference, both myself and my family, but I had to leave on Thursday morning. And Matt, unfortunately for me, was scheduled to speak Thursday night. So I did not get to see him. And my friend Steve G., who is on the board there at the Crested Butte conference, said, "Man, you missed a dynamite speaker. I wish you didn't have to leave." And he gave me his tape. I listened to Matt's tape, and we started kind of communicating back and forth. And so I wanted to have Matt on the program here today. So anyway, that's how we came across each other. I asked Matt to be on the program. So Matt, I'm going to kind of, the whole purpose of this is to listen to your story, hear what you were like, what happened, and what you're like today. So I'm going to kind of back out here for a moment, let you start where you want to start regarding your journey in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I may ask some questions here and there. But Matt, where do you want to start with this story, my friend?
Well, I'd like to start at the beginning for, if not, I might get lost bouncing around, but we'll see. I always like to invite the power into this, and hopefully at my very best, I can be a channel of that love, and something will come out that needs to come out. It is a pleasure though, and it's always an honor to do anything for Alcoholics Anonymous. So thanks again for asking me to do this. And I was born in the Northeast, and we moved around 3 different states by the time I was 4 years old. And that was always causing me to wonder when we were going to be moving next. And possibly difficult, had some effect on my ability to form relationships with other people, because I was always wondering when we were going to leave. And we finally settled in North Carolina when I was, like I said, around 4 or 5 years old. And from the outside, everything was, great with my family. I mean, I had a great upbringing. They taught me morals and values, and had a younger sister that came along when I was around 3. And all of that stuff, is great. I mean, it doesn't necessarily make me an alcoholic. When I was even, younger, right around 3 or 4, my mom told me in recent years that I came up to her and asked, well, where's my real family? I know that I'm adopted, and I need to know where they are. And she just looked at me like as a parent would look at a 3 or 4 year old and just shook their head like, what are you talking about? I've since done some research and looked at the photos, and it lines up. They are who they say they are.
They weren't lying to you after all.
No, they weren't. But in my mind, there was something off. I didn't belong. I wasn't a part of. And I don't even remember that happening, but she told me. And this was, at a very young age, there was something mentally going on where I felt apart from. And even that doesn't really necessarily qualify me as an alcoholic. It's very common. I've heard other speakers, other, men and women who have shared the same feeling of apartness. But for myself, that doesn't make me an alcoholic. It does say, a little bit about what was going on before my first drink, and that I'll just jump right into that, because at 12, I had my first spiritual awakening, and it was as a result of finding my friend, my best friend at the time, his mom's stash of Smirnoff vodka. And I say we were finding it, that makes me think that we were looking for it for a while, that we were seeking it. We just didn't happen across it. But we found that and poured off, enough for each of us in our respective bottles, and went off into the woods as we did when we were younger, and opened the top and put it down. And I thought for a moment that we got the wrong stuff and that it was rubbing alcohol, because my throat and upper chest just ignited. And then 2 seconds later, the thing happened. And all of a sudden, this warm sensation came over me. And I remember laying there and in the woods, rolling around in the leaves, just thinking, man, this is just great. Finally, I could just be. And instead of having to be somebody else or trying to, fit in somehow, be what I thought you wanted me to be, I could just be who I was. And it was this sense of freedom that I had not known for those first 12 years. And I couldn't wait to do it again. I do remember waking up the next morning and not feeling my best, but that didn't matter. The physical consequences were nothing compared to what it did for me at that moment. And being 12, my resources to getting more were limited. We obviously didn't want to take too much of her stash because she would find out, and so we had to be resourceful and find other people's caches of vodka or other substances, and that's kind of where it started. And that summer, I was introduced to some other things, and it had me laughing more than I'd ever laughed in 12 years. And I was just like, gosh, this is it. Like, I want to live like this forever. And if I could, John, if I could have felt like that night forever, you would have a different person on show on this thing today. I tried. Trust me, I did. And I tried to keep that buzz, if you will, going, but I could not find that healthy balance. And whatever that is, I couldn't find it. Consequences were minimal. I didn't really face any serious trouble in my early teens. I was playing sports pretty competitively, soccer in particular. I was really good there, gifted, and put a lot of time and energy into it. And was starting to get good results and had opportunities to play in Division I. If I had continued on the path and wouldn't have gotten injured, obviously, this would have been feasible. But I had found something that was more powerful than even the thrills of victory and the thrill of hard work and team sport success. And that was, it was alcohol, and it became my best friend. And it wasn't in my early years during high school, I wasn't a daily drinker per se. I mean, I would have a couple beers at lunch. But that, I didn't consider that a problem. My teachers were a little, different to that. They didn't like the fact that I had alcohol on my breath when I came back from lunch break, and that wasn't a real popular thing in my high school, apparently. So I got in a little bit of trouble with school, and as a result, I had to I bounced around to a couple different high schools. Let me just say that. And somewhere along that period of time, I crossed over that invisible line that our book talks about, where I have a choice, and I lost the choice over alcohol. And I don't know when it was, but at a certain point, I really thought that, I can control this, or I can choose whether I go out or I don't, or I take a drink or I don't. But that's just not the case. I began living to drink, and it had no longer become a luxury. It just became a part of my daily routine, and my existence was always thinking about the next one. How can we recreate that? And there were some great fun times, like I don't want to, my active alcoholism as it wasn't always dark and cold and demoralizing as it would become. There were some great times, and I don't want to shy away from that, because, if there weren't any good times, I probably wouldn't have taken on to it like a professional full-time job. But I just, I noticed that certain things were not conducive to my drinking. Like, for example, school. I stopped going, instead of actually controlling my drinking, I just would control, my education. And by that, just by not going would be enough for me to continue to do what I wanted to do. I thought I was smart. And I get, at this point, I'm 17. I got to tell you this story because it kind of sets up my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had a brand new car my parents had got for me because I was on my way to play Division I soccer. And I have this car full of friends. We leave the pre-party on the way to the party. Most people don't go to a pre-party on the way to the party. I thought it was an economical way to drink. And at least it would give me, put me in the right mind frame to handle large crowds. But anyways, we're driving, and I'm showing off for these people. There was a guy and two or three girls in the car, and I punch it, and I start going really fast, and go right through a stop sign, come over this embankment, come crashing down, and airbags deployed and everything. It was really a traumatic event. And my first instinct was to open the door, but I couldn't because it was caved in. So I did what, a good old boy in North Carolina would do, and jump out the window like a NASCAR driver and start running down the road. This is a dark rural road in the county somewhere. And I got about 25 feet down the road, and I realized it was really dark and I couldn't see much, and I wasn't going to continue going. And I looked back, and there was my car with the smoke and everything. And I had no concern whatsoever for those other passengers. I had no concern whatsoever besides for anybody but myself. And that's just a snapshot of my life, at that point in time. This is all about me. And when things hit the fan, I run. And I don't care what I have to do to get to the ground, jump out of a window, jump through fire, whatever, I got to go. And so thankfully, by the grace of God, nobody was seriously injured. And there was another car coming right behind us from the pre-party that was empty. It was a station wagon. So we all were able to jump in there. And this was before the days of cell phones. So I had to wait till I got to the party to call home. And I did. And I called and said, "Hey, Mom, you wouldn't believe it. Somebody stole my car." And she's like, "No, I don't think so. The police are here. They already told me what happened."
Oh,
so, yeah. Well, she's like, "I need you to be back there at the accident. We're on our way." So I was like, all right, well, I do like what we do. And I had to put a couple down, and I went back to the accident. And the officers there was two, I'll never forget. They said, "Son, have you had anything to drink tonight?" And I said, "Officer, I'll be honest, I did have one after the accident, but I haven't had any before." And he looked at me and he said, "That's a good answer." And I was like, I know it is. I don't know where it came from, but I was really, that was. And I got a slap on the wrist because of that. And in an instant, I could have taken my life, or let alone even somebody else's. And it was just, what? There was no issue whatsoever. I just had to keep going. I just had this little incident. Now I don't have a car. 2 months later, I borrow my parents' car, and I go out to have my first drinks at this private club downtown Raleigh, and I had some older friends that got me in. I was able to drink in public for my first time. So this was a big deal. I put on a nice shirt, had my pants and nice shoes on, and I go to the bar, and I'd already rehearsed in my head, because I'm really good at putting on a front as if I belong there. So I rehearsed scenarios in my head to make sure. And I went to the bar and ordered a Makers and Ginger, and I had my first one. And just as that one was I was getting done with that, I ordered the second one, and I noticed that they were these older blondes. They were probably about 23 years old at the time, and they were down at the other end of the bar. And I was just, after that first and going into my second one, I thought it was a great time to go to speak with them and let them know where I've been the last 20 plus years of their life. And so we went over, and we just we started laughing, and I don't know if they were laughing at me or with me, but it didn't matter. I was having fun, and we ended up going back to their place, and then we hung out there for a while, and then we had to get back up to the north side of town for some more, for reasons to what people do it early in the morning, and we were going down the road, and I remember for the first time actually seeing a flashlight in the side mirror. And this wasn't the last time I would ever see a flashlight, but it usually is never a good thing.
No.
And it ended up being a police officer. They asked me to pull over, and I didn't really understand that, apparently, or something happened. And anyways, I finally pull over, and I realized I missed something in driver's ed, or they withheld some key information, and that is that you can get pulled over going under the speed limit. And I didn't get that. I don't know if they taught that to you in your school, but I got pulled over going 15 and a 35, or I was going left to center, but they didn't slap me on the wrist. They threw me in jail and for my first DUI. And at 17 years old, I realized something. I did not like jail. That it was not at all part of my makeup. This isn't where I was supposed to be living. But I do what I do when I got into trouble, and I pick up the phone and I call home, and I was like, hey, I'm in jail and I need you to come pick me up. And my dad picked up the phone. He said, I'm sleeping. I'll think about it in the morning. Click. So that was my reality. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I had a few more hours to hopefully, to hang out in jail. But next day or so, whenever he did come to pick me up and I got home, my thought was, all right, well, let's see what I have to do to get through this, because I'm always going to do what I need to do to get to what I need to get. And I'm going to outthink this situation. How am I going to get through it? And luckily, this was at a time when DUIs weren't as costly as they are these days. Luckily, I guess I don't know, but it was a lesser financial burden. And as a result, because I was 17 too, they just required me to go to this assessment to get this alcohol assessment. And this was like a standardized test for my lifestyle. And I didn't really like standardized tests, but I was pretty smart. So I went ahead and I told them what I thought they needed to hear to get them off my back, and ended up failing the test or passing it, depending on, I guess, whose side you're
depending on the perspective.
Yeah, it's and they ended up sending me to. They said you have to go to the ANA, and I was like, hey, what? Like, to go to AA? Like, this is. But whatever. If I have to do it to get you off my back, then I will. And so I did. And on a random night, I don't remember what time. I presume it was in the winter time. Just that's the course of events. But I go into this small church basement in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you could smoke back then, and it was so smoky in this little basement that I couldn't see really any of the people in there at the time. I knew I could hear them and I could see the shadows, but I couldn't actually see the faces until I got up close. And when I did, I noticed one thing that was really obvious, that these people were old, like really, really, really old. Grandma, grandpa, Tales from the Crypt, kind of coming out the grave, kind of old, just to, and I thought that, you know what, they might have been, the first 100, or at least some of them, some of the first 100. Like, these are some old timers, and who knows? I mean, they could have been 40, 50 years old in real life, but in my mind, they were way, way old. These are the alcoholics that are drinking out of brown paper bags. And, thank God you are in the rooms of AA and not out driving around. And, so that's, that was my first meeting. And what I remember is at the end that, said, hey, keep coming back. And I said, yeah, I will make sure to see you in about 50 years or something like that. You just, be good. Don't drive, too much, because, but I'm glad you're here. But me, I'm not an alcoholic. That's impossible. Because I had no idea. I mean, I'm still suffering, from just this delusion that I can wrest satisfaction out of life if only I manage it well. I mean, if only I continue to get my way, then everything's okay. And it's funny is because let's look at how many times I've gotten my way and things still aren't okay. But I don't put the pieces of the puzzle together, because like I told you, I'm a pretty intelligent guy and just smart enough to get myself into a lot of trouble. and so that was my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at 17 years old. And I had no plans to ever see you guys again. I really was just kind of dealing with some legal stuff now. So I just had to, do whatever the system told me to do. And I'd love to tell you that was the last time I ever picked up a drink and drove again, or that was the last time I ever had to be incarcerated. That's not my story. I would continue on doing what I needed to do to get what I needed to get, to feel the way I needed to feel, and would cause a lot of people harm, and a lot of harm to myself. And through the midst of it, it didn't seem. I knew that these weren't the actions that I was growing up. I was taught, and these weren't the principles that I was taught as a kid. But it just seemed like the right, it was the only normal life. I didn't know that there were, people like me in churches just like that, and others, that had a new way to live life. Because in my mind, as long as I could get, that bottle, as long as I could feel okay, then everything else will sort itself out. And there wasn't anything that I could do so bad that another drink wouldn't help me to forget. And this cycle was consistent, and it was constant. And because God forbid I actually had to feel the way I felt after doing some of the things that we have to do to continue to feel the way we feel. And so from 17, I got in some more trouble, and I still hasn't graduated high school. And so they send me out to the mountains. My dad had taken on a new job out there, so they thought, a geographical cure would work. And so I was all about traveling. And as you can tell from my previous, experience, I took the opportunity and went, and I found exactly what I was looking for in the mountains of North Carolina. That's instead of drinking whiskey, I was turned on to moonshine, and this was the stuff that I got from a local moonshiner in a box, and it was a great an economical way to drink as well. And I hope nobody else is out there still drinking. But what I used to do, and I thought it was a good idea in hindsight, was I used to give quarts to my friends and as gifts, because they wouldn't drink it, but I could keep it, and I'd be planning it basically in their freezers or in their house, so that next time I visited, I knew that there would be some there. But in the spirit of being a nice guy, I'm still thinking about myself. So I get out there, and I'm starting to work, and making good money. And it's like, well, who needs to go to school when you have money? Like, people also stop looking at you. If you have a job, they stop giving you a hard time. You just get off my back and let me do what I want to do. And so here I am. I'm making money. I'm doing okay. I'm getting to travel, and things are going well. And we'd snowboard and go skiing and stuff in the wintertime, and in the summer and the spring, we would longboard, very long skateboard basically. And this one night I was out with my roommate at the time, and I go down this hill. It's early in the morning, late at night, whatever. And I wasn't drunk, but I had a couple, and just enough to maybe try something I wouldn't have done normally. And I get going down this hill, and it's a new path that I've never gone down before. And I'm going too fast at the bottom to do a power slide. And I go right through a stop sign and hit head to concrete. I don't remember much, but that's all I know. That and when my friend finally got down, I was basically dead on arrival. The ambulance came, picked me up, took me to the hospital, and they put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But obviously I made it, but it wasn't without a series of miracles and long 3 months, 4 months of rehabilitation. I had to learn how to walk, how to talk, and all of these things again, and put shoes on the right feet. And it's nothing, but another, nothing but the hand of God coming down and helping, do something for me I could do for myself. I tell you that story. Two things. One is I got picked up from my buddy, my old roommate, and he handed me the flask and one of these medicinal cigarettes that weren't quite medicinally grade back then, and I went right back to it, and now I had a high-powered pain medication to moderate my drinking, because you didn't have to drink as much when you were heavily medicated for legitimate pain. The really important piece of that whole story is I haven't once, and it's been almost it's been over 10 years. I haven't even once thought about stepping on a skateboard again. It never even sounded like a good idea. I mean, I wasn't a bad skateboarder either, but how many times have I gotten beat down and hit my bum on drinking and had no defense of picking up the next drink? I mean, I have sufficient evidence. I mean, I was what our book would call a problem skateboarder. With sufficient reason, I could stop skateboarding, but with this alcohol stuff, no way. I mean, I couldn't see that there was any reason to stop. Because for me, it's not a problem. Drinking's a solution. And until I could find a new solution, I was going to continue to drink and continue to give everything that I'd received away for one more. I'm 19 years old, and I have sufficient reasons to not pick up another drink, but I don't have the choice. I've lost that. And so I continue to do what we do. And that from the next several years were some of the darkest years of my life. And I'm not going to go into great depth. I began to compromise every value and principle that I was taught as a child. It began, the dishonesty, the integrity. I was having a hard time keeping jobs. I was in and out of places that I couldn't get out of. You go in voluntarily, to hide out or to take it easy, take a load off for a couple of days, and then they keep you against your will when you try to leave. I've been in those places, and the freedoms that I'd enjoyed up to this point have begun to give them away. And the last thing that I hadn't really tried was to get into a relationship now, because up to this point, I'm just kind of, wasn't really, just flopping around, didn't really have any commitment. So then I was like, well, maybe a girlfriend, she'll fix me if there's anything wrong. And so there was this young woman who just got out of prison, and I was like, you're it. And that's the sick part about this is that was what attracted me to her. I mean, her physical features, obviously, but the fact that she had just gotten out was it told me that she was living in the dark, like I was like in the dark. Like we both were in the same place. I could trust this type of person. That was me. That was my best thinking at the time. I found that it was impossible to because towards the end, we had noticed that our lifestyle choices were getting us into some trouble, and we tried on a couple of occasions to stop, and found it impossible to get her sober, keep her sober as well as myself. And what I know now is that I don't even have the power to keep myself sober, let alone somebody else. That has to be a power greater than myself. But again, me, I'm going to try to reach for everything I can to make this hole inside of me fill with just being okay, with comfort. And she did it for a little bit. She, along with lots of other, whatever we could get would make the pain go away. And there were a couple nights, and she was, maybe she was gone at this point, or no, she was whatever. And I was in this motel room just wanting to not wake up the next day, and would be so disappointed when I'd open my eyes and see the sunlight. Didn't want to live anymore. I know that there was enough, I'd done things that, I didn't want to do, and I just wasn't really happy with myself and wanted to go and just not wake up the next day. But I couldn't, no matter what, I couldn't put down enough, couldn't consume enough poison to make that ever happen. And I'm thankful for that today. But at the same time, I never want to forget that pain. And on a couple of occasions, I went into a treatment center and got a little relief, for 14 days or 30 days or what have you. And then I got home and I went to a meeting, because that's what they said to do, is to go to a meeting. And then I sat in the rooms of AA, and I felt just as crazy and just as diseased as I was sitting in that motel room wanting to die, because I wasn't doing what those men and the women were doing in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was just sitting there like a wallflower, hoping to get what they had. I had a sponsor, or at least I got a sponsor, but what I realize now is that I just had a phone number. There's a big difference between a sponsor and a phone number. Phone number is a good place to start, but it's, there has to be a phone call and, meetings. And so I'm wondering why I'm sitting in these rooms and I just feel miserable. I mean, it's only a matter of time before I take my next drink. And then, it would happen, and I could never get more than 50 days together, and that's even including a 30-day, being, locked down. And my last go round, I would get sober, or I'd get dry. I would get a job, like some temporary work or something like that, and I would start getting some things back. Like I get a paycheck, and then my first thought was, well, let me go get her out of jail. So I went and pay her bond, and then I was like, let's go have some lunch. And we went out for lunch, and it was this Mexican restaurant, and I was eating nachos as is customary for an appetizer, and I just got really thirsty. So the next thought was a Corona. I mean, now again, I have about 54 days, and didn't have defense over the first drink, and it was just a natural thing, because Corona, I mean, that like hardly has any alcohol in it, right?
That's what I hear. Yeah,
that's that's what I'm thinking, and could justify and rationalize it all the time. And then came the next Corona, and by the time our lunch was served, some Jose Cuervo was introduced, and then I don't remember the rest of the meal, and all I know is that the next 3 weeks started what I prayed and is my last spree, both of alcohol, drinking, and of the criminal variety. Because when I start to drink, I lose all perception of the codes of conduct. That I just don't care. Like I turn into a different person, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get what I need to get, to do what I need, to feel the way I need to feel. So we go on and we go home. We're on this spree, and I'm running out of clothes, and I need to say goodbye to my mom and my dog, because they're really the only two people that would have anything to do with me. I'd already hurt my dad too much, I guess, and he just was done. He had already washed his hands, but I went home, and we were sleeping in. I wasn't homeless. I was sleeping in a 96 Buick Century. It was, it wasn't too bad. It was a little small for two people, but we made it work. But I had to go home because I needed to get a change of clothes, and so I did. We went to had to call in at the gate, and I went to get some things from my mom's house. And as we were driving through this gated community my parents lived in, we get pulled over. I get escorted from my vehicle to the back of one of theirs, and I'm sitting in the back, and within minute from me getting pulled out of this car, there's a whole row of like undercover detectives and agents, and there's a dog in my car, and he's not my dog. And I don't know how this all happened, but it was just like a snap of a finger. And I'm looking back there, watching all of this go down, and then here comes my mom driving, because she was wondering where I was, and I'd called in 20 minutes prior, and I see her put their window down and talk with one of the detectives, and then I saw her drive by, and the only thing I can describe it as, I've unfortunately have witnessed, is a mother standing over her son's casket. The sadness and the pain, disgust that was in her face. It looked like she was mourning her son, and there was something inside of me that broke right there that day that I didn't know that I still had, and it cried out, not involuntarily. It said, "God, help me. I don't know how I can. I don't know how I'm going to continue to live like this. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." And the weirdest thing happened, and for some reason, those people in AA came to my mind. And I don't have many prayers that are answered that fast, and that's why prayer has been something I have to continue to work on, because I don't get answers that fast. But that was pretty clear, and I'd love to tell you that I went to my first meeting that day, and I've been an active home group member ever since. But that was a pretty clear direction. And at this time, I'm 23 years old, and I get put in a federal detention facility. I'm facing 929 months for a series of felony charges that I've accrued over the last 2 years, 3 years of time. And that all kind of, this is like, everything is coming together. And so it wasn't looking very good for the home team. And I just remember sitting in there and just thinking to myself, like, this is it, this is what it looks like. And it always, and this would become my, the beginning of my sobriety. And I just remember going to the phone and not having anybody to call, but I only had 10 minutes to get out of my cell. I was on 23-hour, 50-minute lockup every day, but I would just sit there at the phone, but I didn't have anybody to call. And I'd just sit there and just be able to look at, this is my life. And then a man came to a jail, and he was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he came and he brought a meeting to us. And I don't remember much of what was said in those first meetings. I do remember one thing, that after the meeting he would leave and he'd get in the elevator and he'd go down, I guess, his car, go home to his family and his dog or whatever. And I would go back to my world, which at the time was the size of a bathroom, 8 by 12. I was just, that was attraction, and that was it. So for those who are on the front lines and taking meetings and facilities, treatment, corrections, otherwise, it's not so much always what you say, but it's just being there and being present. And people like myself, I'd rather see a sermon than hear one. And that guy was showing me a sermon by the way that he suited up and showed up and carried the message. Fast forward, I ended up, thankfully, obviously I'm not in prison today. I ended up getting another gift and ended up just doing 2 years, just under 2 years, and in the state penitentiary. One of the things that happened was, while I was waiting to get for my trial, my dad found out that he was diagnosed with this rare form of cancer and given 18 months to live. So they found it somehow in their bank to, I don't know how they did it, but they helped me to get a lawyer that wasn't, just a public defender. And that's partially, if not all, of the reason why I didn't end up having to go away for forever. And so I get on down the road, and I'm in a maximum security prison for the first bit, and it's a scary place to be. I wouldn't recommend going. For a 23-year-old, I saw some things I can't unsee, and heard some things I can't unhear. But by the grace of God, I wasn't put in a position where I had to actually, defend myself. I just learned how to pray with my eyes open, and I found Alcoholics Anonymous inside the walls. I found after that first facility, I got moved to another one, and I got to really get plugged in. It was my first home group, and there I found my sponsor. I found Terry. He was, similar, so similar story, totally different background. He was doing 15 years and had been in already for 11, and was walking around like a man of dignity, and there was something really attractive about that. So I kind of went in and was just asked him, if he'd be my sponsor, and followed what he did. We'd sit out on the yard every Sunday, and he would read the book, and I would listen. And then that's when things started to change for me, when I was finally at a point where I was ready to listen. And even though I really wanted to read, and I told him this a few times that, Terry, I can read, and he's like, that's okay. We need you to listen. You can't read and listen at the same time. So just take the cotton out of your ears, put it in your mouth. And he was really not so nice, but in a very kind and gentle way, like exactly how I needed it at that time. Said these are the steps we took, and took me under his wing. And there's a lot of other men who I was getting sober with who had a long-term sobriety who are still inside and don't have dates. I have so much gratitude in my heart for them. And it's part of the reasons why I try to do this, when I'm able to, because there's lots of men who've helped me along the way who aren't able to be here today, to be at some of the places I've gotten to go since I've gotten sober. And but thanks to the men and the women who come to a jail, Terry, my sponsor, had a sponsor that was an outside guy. And so he was kind of, Terry was giving me what Dean, his sponsor, was giving him. And then I was, began to work with some other guys and as the time came. But as Terry and I were going through the steps, he made a couple observations that were really, really important to me, especially, and going into the first step, I still had a couple things. I thought, I don't know if they're really there or not, but I had a couple nice suits, the ones that my mom was going to bury me in. I had a car, which was impounded, but, and Terry was really, said, hey, do you decide when the lights go out at night? And I was like, no. He's like, looks like the state is managing your life for you right now. So you can get off this idea that you're doing well managing your life right now. I knew that I was powerless over alcohol. Some of the things I did while drinking and to get that next drink were evidence to me that I do not have the power to not take that next drink. And as we go along through the steps, things started to shift. My mind began to look at things a little bit differently. And as I get in through, doing the inventory, and then I get to sit down on the yard with Terry and go over this inventory with him, and we go through 6 and 7. And when it came to my 8-step list, that was going to be, a lot of people who I need to owe amends to. But luckily, the book kind of gives us directions on how do we outline those, how do we lay those down, and Terry and I went through and said, okay, this person is going to be now, later, never, and this person's now, later, and so forth. And when we went through it, Terry said, now, for those that I owe amends to now, that means when I get released, which was still over a year away. And I said, okay, fair enough. And it just so happened that right around that time, I got moved to another facility. And at this facility, I have a new sponsor. He had already knew I was coming because of the way that AA works. It's we're everywhere, on the outside and in the inside. And his name was Juan, and Juan said, we went back through the first 7, got level set there, and then Juan and I got to look at the 8-step. He said, now means now you need to get a piece of paper and a pencil and start writing some letters. I was like, all right, you got it. And so we did, and I had an opportunity to make amends to some people, like my dad, who was, his health was continuing to get worse, but I was able to make amends to him directly, one-on-one during the visit. But for people like my mom, who wouldn't come to visit me, and she was at the top of the list for writing a letter. And so I did, and I followed the directions that Juan had showed me in the book. And look, Mom, and literally I did everything possibly to harm this woman except for physically put my hands on her. And I just, I need to know what I can do right now to make, to set right these wrongs, and just send it out. And some time passed, and there I go. I get a letter, and I open it up, and it's a response. And she says, Matt, the only thing that we want from you is for you to love yourself like we love you. And that hit something inside of me, and just began to weep. And it's not really a cool thing to do when you're in prison, but I couldn't help it. I just let it go. and luckily I wasn't in an area at the time where it was problematic, and something so simple but so powerful at the same time. I ended up a few days later getting out onto the yard and walking out, and just on a normal day on the weekend, and I went up to the top of this hill, and I remember looking out and seeing, there's nobody else out on the yard, and I didn't see the Constantine wire, the barbed wire, and the gun towers. They were all gone, and I'm just standing there out in the sunlight, and I realized that I was a free man sitting inside of a medium security prison at the time. And I had this warmth that came over me, and it was a beautiful experience. And I realized that I'd been in prison well before I actually got to prison. I've been living in this bondage of myself and of this disease of alcoholism for many, many years before I actually got there. But thanks now to the steps, thanks to developing this relationship with power greater than myself, to trying to set right the wrongs that I've made, and trying to give away what was freely given to me, I found freedom. And it's real. It's not a synthetic experience. And I've maintained that freedom since. Now, I don't say that I've every day is, the sun is always at my back. I mean, this hasn't been true. However, that freedom can't be taken from me. There's a man, Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book. He was a prisoner of war in a concentration camp back in the World War II, and he made this really interesting observation. And this is at a time where they pulled them out of their lodging, and they shaved all the hair off their body, all of the men, and even their eyebrows. And he's standing there just naked and cold and bald, like from head to toe. And he comes to this realization that things are going to happen, and people and circumstances can take everything away from you, except for one thing, and that is the way that you respond. That is the one thing that no one can ever take from us. And I thought that was so profound, and not to compare our situations, but the spirit is just the same, and is the same as it is today as it was 8 years ago. And that's something that I continue to get to practice. It's not what's happening. God isn't in the event, he's in the response. How am I going to respond? Am I going to bring love, or am I going to bring hatred? Am I going to bring understanding, or am I going to bring, justified rage? How do I navigate through life? I didn't have the tools. I'd had no idea. And it wasn't that I didn't have great teachers. It's just that I wasn't ready to listen, or I wasn't able to fulfill the instructions. So I get to have this experience inside of prison, and then I continue to go about my life, finish my time. My dad keeps his word, and he's able to pick me up. Actually, he wasn't, he'd been through several radiation and chemos and everything, and he's still going to pick me up. Him and my mom had since moved to Tennessee, right next to North Carolina, but he made the trip. And when I got home, my plan was to get to a meeting. That was it. The steak, the women, the other stuff, all of that stuff would come, but my main focus was, let me get to a meeting, because I knew that anything else, any other order of operations, would likely place me back in a position where I would have a hard time staying sober. So that's what I did, and I went to a meeting and had to go through some hoops to get my probation and parole moved to Tennessee. But thankfully, in the last facility I was at, I had an outside volunteer member of AA that was my sponsor, and he said something that was really interesting. He goes to prison so he doesn't have to go to prison, and that was kind of blew my mind. I didn't really understand that at the time. I know what he means a little bit more now, but his name is Bob. He's from Charlotte, and Bob said he knew a guy that knew a guy in Tennessee. I was happy to hear that they had AA in Tennessee, and now I know a guy that knows a guy that's in Tennessee. So I'm thinking, like, this is the mob, and these guys are everywhere. Great, So Paulie's going to pick me up from the bus stop, and we're going to get to work, right? Well, it was kind of like that, but I was relieved to know that there was AA in Tennessee, and I went and I got a home group. Bob was still acting as my sponsor at the time, and he told me he was really big on getting commitments, finding a home group and being involved in service and finding guys to sponsor. And that's what I did. And so I showed up, and I basically just dove into Alcoholics Anonymous head first. And some of the things that have happened, my dad ended up passing away a couple months after I got home. But in those months before he did go on, we had some of the best conversations, and we had some of the best just times, where we didn't have to say anything, but we were together. One night in particular, I remember with his health not, looking good. My AA birthday was in May, and this was in, February. He wasn't going to make it to my or this was in March. Yeah, he wasn't going to make it to 2. And so I got him my 1-year medallion from my home group, and I sat on the couch and I gave it to him. Just like, hey, here, I want you to have this. And, he was looking at it and he realized what it was. And you would have thought I gave the man a 50-carat diamond. I mean, it was, he didn't know any of you personally, but I'll tell you that he loves every single one of you because you gave him his son back. And I didn't want that, I was just looking for a way to not continue to spend my days in jail and in prison, and continue to drink against my own will. But I ended up becoming a son. And I was able to be there for my mom and my sister when we put them to rest, and to be present is a big deal for us. I mean, I'm always on the move, and I can't sit still, especially when there's painful stuff going on. But you guys showed me how I can be present, and so I did. And at the same time, I get to start going to school because I was living at home and I didn't have to work immediately. I started going to school and took a couple classes, and what do you know? I mean, I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was. I mean, you show up and you do the work. It's kind of, it's a good recipe for getting good grades. I don't know. I didn't miss that. I must have missed that lesson in a previous life, but I started going to school and I began to get involved at the same time with my home group and getting involved in the service side of the triangle, and through learning about the traditions and through learning about the concepts and all 3 legacies, I have been given the tools to deal with people and to help me to understand how to be one chain in the whole, one link in the chain. And that's the gift. I just like anything, if 2 classes are good, then I might as well take 4 next semester. And I continued on that cadence and ended up getting an associate's degree and wanted to go on and study at a private school, business school in Nashville. And so sure enough, I was able to transfer my credits and I went and I earned my bachelor's of business administration and in business at this business school. And I reached that goal because I set out to head that direction, and I suited up. I showed up. I did the work. I showed up early. I stayed late. I did the same things that I learned in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in higher education, and they won't kick you out if you do that. And my last semester, one of my professors saw my effort and my energy and my potential and what have you, and he nominated me for this scholarship to study in France for my master's. And so 3 months from the time I graduate with my bachelor's, I'm on a plane to live in France for the next 2 years or a year and a half and study over there. Found a home group, out there in Paris, and the beginners meeting, they meet there at 10:30 on Saturday mornings. I took a 2-hour train there on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Actually, 10 a.m. Great group of people, and I'm sitting in there. One of my first meetings in France. We sit there in an attic of this church, and I'm sitting around, and it's customary there for people to go around the room and introduce themselves, their sobriety date, where they're from, and I'm sitting there, and people are, Croatia, Germany, Seychelles, China, and there's people from all over the world, people just like me, sitting in this room, in this church, this old church, and it took everything in me. I just, I wanted to start crying, because it's like how does the man whose world's the size of an 8x12 cell get to go to a meeting and get to just live in a world where he's surrounded by people like him in all places, in France. And I mean, I had so many moments like that where I just couldn't believe, and still can't believe, that this is actually my life. There have been hardships. I mean, of course, there's things. This is all new, and I'm learning as we go along, and I'm leaning on people like you and a lot of others who have gone before me to learn, how, like, what are you supposed to do when you ask somebody to marry? When you ask my wife to marry you? Well, talk to her dad. Okay, well, that's good to know, and so I did, and got married like a year and a half ago, and that's been a great, interesting, adventure. And I mean, I'm just really, excited to see what's next, because I have a power in my life today. I have this relationship with God that surpasses me having to figure everything out. Just to keep it really simple, I get to wake up each day, and then it's what am I going to get? What's my assignment? What would you have me do today? And some of the greatest gifts of my life have been simply by reaching out and seeing how I can help somebody else. I've been able to do some really amazing things.
Do you have a big book near you by any chance?
I do, yes.
Perfect. I think it's page 150. It's in A Vision for You. I heard you read it at the end of the Crest Butte meeting about how basically God can take these tattered lives of ours and turn them into something that is useful. Would you mind reading that?
153. It may seem incredible that these men are to become happy, respected, and useful once more. How can they rise up out of such misery, bad repute, and hopelessness? The practical answer is that since these things have happened among us, they can happen with you. Should you wish them above all else and be willing to make use of our experience, we are sure they will come. The age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that.
The age of miracles is still with us. Our own recovery proves that. And Matt, this has been, I have just thoroughly enjoyed our time together. Is there anything you want to say before we close this out?
No, just thanks again for the opportunity and for what you're doing and carrying the message.
God bless you, my friend, and thank you for being a part of this journey with me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Matt C. It's been fantastic. I appreciate it.
Thanks, John.